Hi, everyone. This is Vanessa Rosenblum, president of Pro REA Staffing. And today we're here with Christen Tull. Christen and I met almost 10 years ago, I think. So Christen was a candidate, and I ended up placing her in an executive real estate assistant position in Los Angeles. And we stayed in touch over the years. And I was just so impressed with Christen's ability to create order out of chaos and to manage her team and manage up. And over the years, I've asked her to work with assistants in Los Angeles one-on-one to train them so that they could manage transactions more efficiently, or learn the skills that they needed to hold on to their jobs. And she was incredibly good at training these assistants. And now she's graduated from being an assistant, and now Christen is an associate partner at Pacific Union International in Beverly Hills. And she teaches basic contract courses, advanced contract strategy, and probate classes.
No. Well, thank you for that introduction. That is sounds really fancy, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So I thought today's focus is systems. We're talking about how do we create systems, how do assistants implement systems to help their team reach greater levels of productivity. But I think that we should start with the most basic question, which is, what do we mean by a system? And what are some of the core systems that a real estate office needs to have if they're going to be a high functioning team?
So I think the general answer to that question is that a system is basically a step-by-step outline and control system for each facet of a real estate agent or team's activities, including all of the variables. And the basic systems I think that every team or agent needs help organizing and set up is one for lead generation and conversion, one for marketing to leads that are active leads, past clients and contacts, and also to market active listings. The third would be, somehow organizing, managing, and updating the status of the active listings and active buyer activities. What have they seen? What are they looking for? What's being done to find that for them? And then the fourth being transaction management. As far as, these systems, they really need to be a reference point for each step. And like I said before, they include all the variables, and these systems should also include calendar entry dates for things like contingency periods or target points for when it's time to talk about a price reduction with a listing, or touching base with a buyer who's been looking at property but has sort of dropped off, with dates and reminders ahead of time, task lists with deadlines for those tasks, status notes, and the supporting documentation for anything that's ongoing.
Perfect. So it's there. I mean, we're talking about a lot of systems and a lot of steps, which might seem overwhelming for a new assistant. So if somebody is just starting out with a new team, what are some of the first things that they should tackle? What are the high priority systems they should look at?
All right. So establishing basic communication with the agents and principals in ongoing transactions is going to be the most important, because you have fiduciary duty to the client, and clearly those are revenue generating activities. So active listings, the showings there, finding property for buyers, and like I said, establishing that communication with the agent. Let me see what kind of systems you have here, making sure you're at least familiar with the existing systems. And I wouldn't necessarily change the wheel in this situation just first coming in. I would analyze what's there, clean it up, and make sure everything's ready to go from that point forward before making any changes.
Perfect. So let's talk about communication systems. Give some examples of simple communication systems that help streamline the way an office operates.
Sure. So sort of tying into the last question, the first thing is you need to know what the agent and team's preferences are. For example, when do they like to order reports and preliminary title reports for listings? The sooner they're done, maybe prior to going to market, the better set up you're going to be. And, who does what, and, finding out what systems they're currently using, because the most important aspect of these systems and making sure they're working is looking at what everyone's using, maximizing it, making sure everyone's on the same page. There are a lot of programs and ways to share communication across the board, but sharing contacts would be one of the most important. Making sure that everyone's copied on certain emails, and does it update in real time? Is there shareability? Can it be used in the field? And then also just setting up basic templates for things like in car forms, the transaction documents. These are things that the agent is going to look for, but won't necessarily have an infrastructure for. And I don't think that those are something that they're going to get so involved in, but they're certainly going to want to know what the status is of those important things.
And talk about communicating, talk about the end of day email.
Oh, sure. So, you know, there are so many systems in place. A lot of them are going to be for the assistant, mostly internally. But the end of day email should be more of a task list, the things that are crucial, vital, and very time sensitive. The special things that the agent has asked you to check on that might concern them when they wake up in the middle of the night. So at the end of the day, it's very nice to send an email out to the agent or all the team so that everyone's on the same page as to what got done, what didn't, and why. Any really important notes that would affect any desired outcomes that should have taken place. And obviously, there's ongoing communication during the day, but because agents are oftentimes in the field moving from one place to another, a good recap to reinforce what's going on or re-ask a question that's important or needs some additional information after you've started working on it is great. So when you put that end of day email together, you know, you want to make it those bullet points of what was accomplished that day, what needs attention right away, and anything that needs clarification.
I want to go into asking questions in a little more depth because I think this is something that you're really good at least you were when you were training my assistants. Talk to me about what kinds of questions should an assistant be asking their agent when they're thinking about the productivity of the team or implementing systems?
So I think that it's really important assistant talks to the agent and asks them what they feel like has worked for them in the past. Let's look at the existing systems. What do they use the most? What do they not use? Uh, when they are using something, what do they wish the system also had in place? Um, can they access it where? When do they like to access it? And really getting to the point of why they per se like something, what their major concerns are with the downfalls or shortcomings in those systems. Because if you really understand the agent's motivations and needs, you can improve what they're using. And when you do that, they're much more likely to adhere to what it is you're implementing for them, especially if it's something that's already at least familiar on a certain level. So if they're using Outlook, if they're using Google Contacts, I would highly recommend trying to streamline it into Google Calendar, Gmail. But whatever the system is, the more complicated it gets, sure, the higher level functioning it can be. And for an assistant, someone who's really detail oriented, that's great. But for an agent, you need to make sure that it's workable on a basic level, a highlight level, where if they need additional information, they can click into that and find it. So I think it's just finding out what the basic needs are, adding to it, building, and just checking in constantly to make sure that the agent or team knows where to find that information and that it is still working for them. Because if it's not working, there's no point to implementing it.
Right. And then we get into the accountability and making sure that the people on the team are following the system. So, for example,
Right.
like entering communication into the system or reporting back on the piece of the project that the agent or the buyer's agent needed to work on. How have you in the past helped your team stay on track with the systems that everyone has agreed that you're going to implement when maybe they're not staying compliant?
So a lot of times that end of day email you can use for that, right? So you may enter in what needs to be done that's important or upcoming contingency deadlines or inspections, things like that, and make sure that there's a name assigned to something or a due date. Oftentimes when these emails are shared across a team, it's a great way to make them feel accountable in the eyes of the rest of their teammates. No one wants to look like the person who's bringing the least value to the team. So instead of peppering them with questions or multiple phone calls. No one wants to be a nag, but at the same time, you do need to manage up and make sure that all the pieces fit together to fit the ultimate goal. So I find that a nice passive way to put information in front of everyone else at the same time in a system that you're already using.
That's a great example. Thank you. And
You're
where
welcome.
can an assistant have the biggest impact on the overall productivity of their team? So, where can they help drive sales?
Oh, so that's covering the gaps, right? So we all know that agents are, some are detail oriented, but most are really great with people. They're extroverts and they're great influencers. And so they're in the field a lot, moving from place to place. And the most important thing for them is that connection with the person. So I find that transfer of information, especially detailed stuff that is required to maybe enter a property on the MLS or create marketing verbiage for a property that, especially something high end or with a lot of amenity, it can get lost in translation. So I would prefer to ask the agent if I can accompany them on an appointment, make a separate appointment just to meet the principal on the transaction, get a feel for them. I'm certainly asking the agent about the client's personality. And at the very least, you can always create a checklist for these things and actually stick it in a listing package with the listing agreement and all of those things, because almost all agents, if nothing else, are going to take that listing package with them. And so simply putting a checklist for questions that can be answered with the client there while it is in the forefront of their mind will certainly help and work.
Perfect. And what advice, in wrapping up, what advice would you give to a new assistant who is feeling overwhelmed? They've walked into an office that isn't well organized and their agent is doing the classic dump and run, and they just don't feel like they have their arms around what's happening in their office. Where would you have them start, and what steps would you have them take?
Write everything down. Um, Ask questions in the beginning. Once you know your agent, what motivates them, what concerns them, it's a lot easier to anticipate their needs. But being prepared. So some of the things that I like to do, and it does take a little more startup time, anytime an assistant comes into a situation like that, is to create tools that organize for yourself. So one of my favorite tricks is my opening emails with escrows. I like to use a template to each of the parties involved in a transaction. This includes to the escrow officer. So, depending on the skill level of the assistant, you may or may not know every single piece of information that needs to be sent out to an escrow officer. Some of these things might include your buyer's contact information. I actually like to count out contingency dates in my contracts. I can't tell you how many times I get them incorrectly, but if I count them out and list them, if there is any inconsistency or holidays, they get pointed out in advance. Hopefully, I do have a preliminary title report. I want to make sure that any documentation I have is sent to escrow and the buyer's agent at that same time. If you have it, it's always better to send it over. That way, as escrow progresses, as you receive more information, all you're doing at that time is reviewing the new information. You're already set up. No one is piecemealing you, asking you for things that they will need, and they will need it every time. That would include asking escrow to send wiring instructions to the buyer right away, counting out contingency dates for the buyer right away, reminding them of when the earnest money deposit funds are due, reaching out to the other side to either tentatively schedule dates for inspections, make sure there are no problems, making sure utilities are on. If you tackle all of these things on the day that you open escrow, you're really going to be set up for success. And when your revenue generating activities that you have such a high responsibility to perform are set up correctly from the beginning, it opens you up for a lot more time to manage the extra things such as great lead conversion and client follow-up, and help your agents in focusing on those, because you are not focusing on reactivity to the things that have so many time frames.
I think that's such helpful advice. So write everything down and create templates for recurring processes and get ahead of the things that you can get ahead on. handle things up front when you can, so that you can handle all the other stuff that's going to come at you throughout the rest of your day. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
And a good resource is always escrow and title. You should definitely reach out to the people who specialize in these fields and say, hey, what is it you will need from me every time?
Absolutely. Perfect. Do you want to touch on marketing and marketing systems, and how the average assistant, not like a marketing assistant, is able to play a key role in that part of the process?
Sure. So I think that it's really important to take a look at where an agent's leads are coming in. So you might get leads from websites, from Zillow. You might have leads that are referrals from past clients. You will probably have leads to follow up on from open houses. So to define criteria, based on a conversation with the agent you're working with, to classify these leads as ready to go, very likely future clients, being A, clients that need a little time, but you're working on B, maybe C clients who, if the right opportunity came about, some passive marketing, some listings being sent, or just emails, newsletters. And I like to add, some creative, fun things that people like reading, such as if it's Memorial Day weekend, like it is coming up here, some of the things that are going on in the area I'm working in. So that's a good way to at least start with the marketing. Clearly, with any past client, you want to do follow-ups, maybe follow-ups on the anniversary date of closing. People always talk to their friends and family when they're moving, so I think it's very important to check in with anyone you just closed a deal with. I think that should be the most direct marketing: the phone call, the email, something, a closing gift that can be a talking point possibly with anyone who enters their new home. And as far as more active leads that are writing offers and viewing property, or sellers who are prepping for market, I think that is checking in, taking a look at all of the automatic search results you get from the MLS, and following up, asking questions about the specific properties, what the client might not like, what the client does like about it, so that you can better anticipate their needs. I can't tell you how many times I think we have maybe gotten into escrow because buyers or sellers, they tend to look at things when it's convenient for them. And in this competitive market, that's not always time effective in order to secure the deal. So taking a look at it and just pointing it out. I also feel like it makes the clients realize that you are actively working for them when you're not there. And I think that makes a huge difference in the confidence level in the client with the agent and their support staff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Christen. It was so great to talk to you about something that I consider you an absolute expert in. So everyone, hope that you got some valuable nuggets from this conversation that you'll be able to apply in your own teams. And we wish you all a happy Memorial Day weekend. Thanks, Christen.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Take care.